Hi. In this video, we're going to be working with how to solve two-step inequalities. Now, if you remember two-step equations from Unit 1, you're going to notice that we had a couple of rules that we wanted to remember in order for us to be successful in that. Those same rules are going to apply here. So if you were good in those sections, then they should translate to you being successful in this one. So now we also just got to remember how to graph inequalities. That's where Section 1 and Section 2 came from. So you ready? Let's begin. So like anything, we want to make sure we understand what are our rules. The first rule is this: if you see a fraction, let's get rid of it. Let's get rid of the unusual thing that sometimes prohibits us from getting this question right. So let's get rid of fractions by multiplying by whatever our denominator is. Step 2 is you're going to see a term that's being added or subtracted next to x. Let's get rid of that number by doing the inverse, which is either addition or subtraction depending on the problem. And lastly, if we did step 1, then that means we have possibly a number that's next to x. Well, next to means being multiplied. So what's the opposite? What's the inverse of multiplication? Division. So step 3 says, let's go ahead and divide. Now you're going to notice it also says multiply. Why? You don't always have to get rid of a fraction. You can sometimes wait till the end. But for me, let's get rid of something that we don't really enjoy right away. So you ready to start a problem? Let's get started. So in our first problem, it says graph 2x minus 4 greater than 8 on a number line. Before we do that, we first have to get x by itself, so we have to isolate it. So we're going to take a look at the left side. The left side has something more complicated than just an x. There's a 2x minus a 4. So what are we going to do? The same technique that we did in Unit 1, I'm going to draw my line down the middle of technically where the equal sign used to be, but now it's an inequality. So let's go ahead and do that. Next, you're going to ask yourself, is x by itself? There isn't. So let's go through our steps. I don't see fractions, so move on to step 2. Do you see a term that's being added or subtracted next to x? You do. There's a minus 4. So what are we going to do? What's the opposite of minus 4? Hopefully you agree. It's what? It's plus 4. So we're going to go ahead and add 4 to both sides. Now when I do that, the 2x is going to drop nicely. I'm going to be left with 2x. The negative 4 and the positive 4 are going to cancel out. And I'm going to drop the greater than symbol. And 8 plus 4 is going to be 12. Now I'm almost done. But x isn't by itself. So I have to ask myself, what's my last step? Well, my last step is to divide, but why? Do you notice that there's a 2 in front of the x? They're next to each other. What does that mean when they're together like that? It means they're multiplying. So what's the inverse of multiplication? Division. Division represents a fraction. So we're going to go ahead and divide both sides by 2. The left side, the 2's cancel out. X drops. The right side, 12 divided by 2 is 6. So now our number line, we can now graph because our final solution is x is greater than 6. So how does that look at the number line? Remember, draw a number line. Put the number that you're working with in the middle. You can put one less, one greater than, so 5 and 7. And we have to ask ourselves, is this going to be an open circle or a closed circle? Remember, less than or greater always represent an open circle. So on top of 6, I'm going to put a greater than symbol, which is, I'm going to put an open circle. And then now I have to ask myself, in which way is the arrow facing? Remember what we said? If x is on the left-hand side, I could just look at the arrow. So let's draw an arrow. You notice that the arrow is facing the right. So that means I'm looking for numbers greater than 6. That's to the right. And that's my final answer. That's how you graph it on a number line. Not bad? Let's try example 2. At any point, if you feel ready that you want to try one on your own, pause the video, attempt it, and then press play, and then I'll be here to answer the question for you. So example 2, graph 3y minus 5, which is less than or equal to 4 on a number line. Before we do that, we have to first ask ourselves, is x by itself? Hopefully you agree it's not. There's a 3 attached to y, which is multiplying, and there's a minus 5 next to it. So what are we going to do? Let's do the same thing. Let's draw a line down the middle of the technically less than or equal sign, and let's get x by itself by moving the term that's technically being added or subtracted. There's a minus 5, so what's the inverse of minus 5? I'm going to go ahead and add 5 to both sides. The 3y drops down nicely. The negative 5, positive 5 are opposite, so what are they going to do? They're going to cancel, so I'm just going to cancel them out. I'm going to drop the inequality, less than or equal to, and 4 plus 5 is going to be 9. Now I'm almost done, but unfortunately y is not by itself. So I have to ask myself, y and 3 are doing what? They're being multiplied, so what's the inverse of multiplication? It's division, so I'm going to divide by 3, and it's going to be y, because the 3's cancel out, less than or equal to 9 divided by 3, which is 3. And that's my final answer. That's my inequality. However, we have to graph on a number line. So what are we going to do? We're going to draw a number line. We're going to put 3 right in the middle. We're going to put 1 less than, 1 greater than. And then I have to ask myself, on top of 3, is it going to be a closed circle or an open circle? Well, it says less than or equal to. So because of that, that's going to be a closed circle on top of 3. Some people might want to draw it on top of 3 or on 3. That's okay. And then the arrow, remember, if y is facing, if the letter's on the left-hand side, draw an arrow out of it. The arrow is going to the left, which means my arrows represents numbers that are less than 3, which is exactly what it says. Y is less than or equal to 3. And that's your answer. Hopefully you got that one right. So let's move on to example 3. Example 3, they're going to try to trick you. Why? You guys notice that everything's kind of flipped on you? If it's flipped, it's okay. Let's leave it like this. That's perfectly fine. So the first step is x by itself? It's not. There's something next to it. What is next to it? A 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my number line. I'm going to draw a line where the inequality is, and I'm going to ask you, what's the number that I have to move first on the right-hand side? Remember, we're trying to get x by itself. X isn't by itself because there's a number being added or subtracted next to it. It's the 3. Now the question is 3 positive or negative? I hope you agree that it's going to be positive. If you thought negative, remember, this negative belongs to x. It doesn't belong to 3. The 3 happens to be positive because if you look at the sign to the left of it, there's no sign which represents a positive number. So what I need to do is I need to move that 3 by doing the opposite, the inverse, which hopefully you agree, if it's positive, the inverse is negative. So I'm going to subtract 3 to both sides. And I'm going to have negative 3 minus 3, which is going to be negative 6. Remember, 2 negatives you add stays a sign. Greater than, 3's cancel out nicely. And I'm going to drop down the negative x. You have to make sure you bring the negative because the x was always negative from the beginning of the problem. Now, I'm almost done, but x isn't by itself. Technically, remember, there's always a 1 in front of the x. It's negative, so I have to technically do what to both sides? I have to divide both sides because negative 1 and x are together, which is multiplication. I'm going to divide both sides by negative. And as you're doing this, I'm hoping something jumps out at you. Do you remember what happens when you divide or multiply both sides by negative? It flips the inequality. So because it flips the inequality, I have to make sure that negative 6 divided by negative 1 is going to be a positive 6. There was a greater than inequality, but it's going to flip to become less than. And then negative 1 divided by negative 1 cancel out. And it's just this. 6 is less than x. However, do I want to graph it like in this method? I don't. Why? X isn't on the left-hand side. So what am I going to do? I'm going to flip everything. I'm going to read everything the opposite direction. If I read right to left, it says x is greater than 6. So if I flip everything, this is what I'm going to get. I'm going to get x is greater than 6. And that is the inequality that I want to remember and I want to write. So again, a couple things. This was a challenging problem. Why? Because of the order of everything was written, but also you happen to have had a negative x, which is okay. Just when you divide both sides by a negative, you have to make sure you flip the inequality. And lastly, if you see that the x is not on the left-hand side, you want to rewrite it so that it's more clear. And I did that, and I got x is greater than 6. So now I could actually draw this on a number line. I'm going to put 6 in the middle. I'm going to put 1 less than, 1 greater than, just so that's a balanced number line. I'm going to ask myself what type of circle is this going to be. It says x is greater than, which is an open circle. Now, which way is the arrow facing? I can do the trick because x is on the left-hand side. It's facing the right. Why? Because I'm looking for numbers greater than 6. So at 6, 7, 8, etc. The direction where the arrow is facing. And that's my final answer. So this definitely was a challenging one, but hopefully this is one that you can remember and practice so that you can be more successful. Okay. Example 4. I want you to look at it. What's the first thing you notice? Hopefully you agree it's the fractions. So what's the first thing I'm going to get rid of? I'm going to get rid of the fractions. Wait, how do I get rid of a fraction again? I do the opposite, which is multiplying by whatever my denominator is. So look at your denominator. What's the number that you see underneath the fraction? Hopefully you agree. It's what number? It's 2. So what am I going to do? I'm going to multiply every single piece by 2. When I multiply every single piece by 2, I hope you agree what's going to happen on the left-hand side. The 2's are going to what? They're going to cancel out. I'm going to drop down the x. 2 times 4 is going to be minus 8, greater than or equal to 2 times negative 2, which is going to be negative 4. Now, when I do that, you have to agree this looks a lot nicer. It's cleaner. There's no more fractions, and now you can actually go ahead and solve this answer. How do I get x by itself? What's next to it? There's a minus 8, so I'm going to draw my line across the inequality. What's the opposite? What's the inverse of negative 8? Positive 8, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to add 8 to both sides. I'm going to drop everything that's not being touched, so the x drops. The negative 8 and 8 cancel out. The inequality drops, and negative 4 plus 8. Don't get confused. Don't add. Why? Because how many negatives you have? You have 1. When there's one negative, what do? You subtract. 8 minus 4 is 4. 8 is bigger, so it's going to be positive 4. And that is my final answer because x is by itself. It's just 1x. Now I could go ahead and actually graph this on a number line. I'm going to put 4 right in the middle. It's going to be a closed circle because it says equal to. Remember, equal to means including 4, so it's also going to be 4. And then I'm going to draw an arrow so that I know which direction it's facing. Why can I do this? Because x is on the left-hand side. So I'm looking for numbers greater than 4, which are definitely going to be to the right. So my arrow is going to face the right, and that's how I graph it on a number line. So remember, when you see fractions, what do? Try to get rid of it because it makes this a lot easier. You become more efficient. Okay, we got 2 more problems. In example 5, I want you to try this one on your own. Pause the video, see if you get it right, and then press play, and hopefully you did. So example 5, it wants us to graph 4x plus 3 is less than negative 13 on a number line. Let's do it. But the first thing I have to ask myself is x isolated? Is it by itself? Hopefully you agree it's not. There's 2 things next to it, a 4 and a 3 representing 2-step equations or inequalities. So what's my first step? I'm going to draw a line down my inequality so I can stay balanced. So whatever I do to one, I do to the other side. What's the first number I'm going to move? I'm going to move the plus 3. So what's the inverse of plus 3? What's the opposite of plus 3? Minus 3. I'm going to subtract 3 to both sides. Now when I do that, if I don't work with the number, I'm going to drop it down. So I'm going to drop down the 4x. The 3, negative 3 cancel out nicely because they're opposite. They're positive and negative. I'm going to drop down the inequality and then negative 13 minus 3. Don't get confused. 2 negatives. What do you do when there's 2 negatives? You add. 13 plus 3 is 16. But since they're both negative, it stays negative. Now I'm almost done. But my x isn't isolated. So I need to get it isolated. There's a 4 next to it. Wait, what does it mean when there's a 4 next to the x? It means it's multiplied. So what's the opposite of multiplication? It's division. So I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by 4. And I'm going to get x is less than negative 16 divided by 4, which is negative 4. And that's my final answer. Notice I didn't flip the inequality because I didn't divide by a negative. You only flip it if you divide or multiply by a negative, not if your answer happens to be negative, okay? So remember those little things. Now, I wish I was done, but I'm not. I have to graph it on a number line. So what am I going to do? I'm going to grab a number line. I'm going to put negative 4 right in the middle. 1 less than is negative 5. 1 greater than is negative 3. I'm going to ask myself what type of circle is this going to be. It says less than, so it's going to be an open circle. Facing which direction? Because x is on the left-hand side, I can draw an arrow out of it, and it's facing the left. And that's my final answer. Not bad. Hopefully you got this right. If you did, awesome job. If you didn't, it's okay. We still got a lot more to do with the homeworks and everything else we could do. So let's try our last example, which is example 6. So in example 6, I want you to work on this one on your own. Once you're done, press play, and hopefully you can get it right. Okay, let's get started. Now, to be fair, there's 2 easy methods. There's 2 methods of solving this. If I go through the process of getting rid of fractions, technically, I want to get rid of this fraction. So I'm going to do it on my first step. And then also my second step, you could also do it by just working with the fractions. But because I want to make everything easier, sometimes getting rid of the thing that you don't enjoy makes this a little bit easier for you. So let's try method 1. And method 1 is going to be, let's get rid of the fraction first. So notice you see the fraction. What's your denominator? It's a 2. So what's the opposite of dividing by 2? It's going to be multiplying by 2. So everything is going to get a 2. I'm going to have 2 times y, which is 2y. The 2's cancel out on the next one, so I'm left with plus 1, less than or equal to 2 times 2, which is 4. From here, you have a 2-step equation, which you can do on your own any day of the week. So what am I going to do? I'm going to minus 1 to both sides. Remember, stay balanced. I didn't draw my line down my inequality because I want you guys eventually to get used to this. Drop down the 2y. And I have 2y less than or equal to 3. Last step, divide by 2, divided by 2. And I'm going to come over here, and I get y is less than or equal to 3/2, which we're going to leave as an improper fraction for now, okay? That's my first answer, which is completely right. Now, my second method is going to be, well, what happens if I just worked with it as a fraction? Why would I maybe want to do this for this problem? Notice that y is already by itself in the sense that there's nothing being attached to it. So if I want to get y by itself completely, I just have to move that half. Well, how do I move that half? I do the opposite, which is minus a half. But I have a problem. On the right side, I have a whole number minus a fraction. So what does that mean I have to do? I have to get an LCD. So LCD, what does that mean? I'm going to turn 2 into 2 over 1 minus 1 over 2. So I'm going to get an LCD. I'm going to multiply this by 2, and if you notice, this is going to become 4 over 2 minus 1/2. And if I combine that, 4 over 2 minus 1 over 2 is going to end up being 3 over 2. Now, why is that so important? Look at your final answer, the last one that we just did. The first scenario is y less than or equal to 3/2. So in this scenario, let's combine like terms. It's going to be y. These cancel out, less than or equal to. Let me write that because that was terrible handwriting. Y is less than or equal to 3 over 2. And it was the same exact answer. So in all honesty, if you're great with fractions, you're great with LCDs, try method 2. If you struggle with fractions, well, let's get rid of it right away. Now, last step, I have to draw this on a number line. So I'm going to go ahead and do this on the right-hand side. I'm going to put 3 over 2 in the middle. It's going to be a closed circle because it's including, and then the arrow's facing the left. So it's going to be going to the left, which is going to be that as your final number line. Okay? So hopefully this lesson went well. You have to make sure you're super careful with all the fractions. The steps, multiplying, dividing by a negative because it flips inequalities, then an open circle is the closed circle. But if you remember all the rules and you wrote all the rules down from section 1 to section 3, you should be good. So best of luck, and I'll see you next time.